Hey, what's going on YouTube? HyperDark19 here with another video on my Gravekeepers deck for my Breaking the Meta segment. I'm gonna have to really work on making these videos shorter. I guess I just have a lot to say. So if you bear with me, I'll now, in my second part of the video, get to why I excluded some of the commonly played cards that I did, and what my record with the deck is, and how it combats meta decks, and lastly, where you can purchase the cards that you need to make this deck and for how much. So it's on a relative budget, so if you're a budget player like me, you'll definitely enjoy this deck. So, alright, first of all, let's get to some of the common cards that a lot of people play in Gravekeepers that I did not include. Number one, Pot of Duality slash Solemn Warning. I know a lot of people play these cards, a lot of people insist that they're like the end-all be-all of Yu-Gi-Oh! But in my I've said it before and I'll say it again. Just because a card is good, and Pot of Duality and Solemn Warning are definitely both great cards. I'm not saying they're bad; they're not. But I've said it before and I'll say it again. Just because a card is good doesn't mean it can't be overrated somewhat. And I think Pot of Duality and Solemn Warning are both overrated in that they are good, but you can definitely win without them, as this deck has proven for me. Like I said in my last video description, this deck went 3-1 at my locals. I got second place. I won against Infernities, Fish OTK, and Drag Unities. Lost to Fabled's final round, but even that was closely contested, as I will relate in this video. Another one of the cards that I did not include that a lot of people do use in Gravekeepers is Malefic Stardust Dragon. I understand why people play it because it's a dark, helps with Allure of Darkness, you know. Dark is always a good attribute. It protects your field spell with its effect. It's easy to summon. All you have to do is remove a Stardust from your extra deck. I mean, what could be easier than that? However, I just personally don't really like the card because I feel like there are more constructive uses of your deck space than putting something like that in there that just doesn't really go with the theme, in my opinion. I also don't really like its ability that restricts attacks. While it's on the field, only it can attack, and none of your other Gravekeepers can attack. I feel like the Gravekeepers themselves in the attack department are really underrated because people are like, oh, well, they're only 2,000 attack, they're wimpy. But most people don't consider the fact that, I mean, if in a game with 8,000 life points, just 4 direct attacks, 4 direct attacks with a 2,000 attack monster, and that's game. So a lot of people just don't think about that. And I think Malefic Stardust is another one of those cards that doesn't really need to be in this deck. I mean, most of the time you won't have to go through all 3 of your field spells in a duel anyway, although I did playing against Drag Unities, and that's the obvious exception because Drag Unities use the field spell a lot. So that's possibly might be a good choice to put Malefic Stardust for that matchup, but I don't know. That's your call. I personally don't like it, but if you play it, fine. That's cool. I understand why. It's a decent card. Anyway, and last but not least, a lot of people play Gale in this deck. Gale the Whirlwind, the Blackwing Tuner I'm talking about. A lot of people play it, one, because of its nifty ability that halves the attack of another monster, and also because it's a tuner and it gives you synchro options. I personally don't really like Gale in this deck because, well, it is a dark as well. That's another plus in its favor. But I don't really care about having the attack of monsters my opponent has when I'm just going to mostly pop them with Descendant anyway. And the cards that I can't pop, like Stardust, I'm going to either deprison or return to the extra deck with Compulse and the like. Or Royal Oppression also just stops the special summons cold. So with Gale, I'm not really interested in having attack. I'm more interested in destroying. Like I said, this deck is all about 1-for-1s in my opinion. So I don't really need Gale for my overall strategy, so therefore I don't use it. I feel like like I said before, there's more constructive use of my deck space. So like I said before, this deck went 3-1 at my locals. I won against Drag Unities, Fish OTK. Oh, sorry, let me just scroll down my little list here. Yeah, Fish OTK, Drag Unities, and Infernities. The Infernity matchup especially was pretty easy because he was using a combo deck with Infernity Breaks and Mirages and stuff. A lot of stuff that involves the graveyard, and I was just like, Necro Valley, you can't do any of that stuff. And he was like, oh. So, yeah, that kind of shut down the Infernity matchup. Alright, so on to how this deck combats the meta decks. I talked about the Infernities already. Drag Unities. This deck combats Drag Unities because they also are heavily dependent on their field spells, so you can just play your Necro Valley and destroy their Dragon Ravine, but they could do the same thing. So, I mean, it's just field spell wars all day between those two cards. So you might want to side deck Field Barrier for in case you go up against the Drag Unity deck. Also, just the anti-special summon, anti-synchro strategy that I've got going on with the Gravekeepers can get around Stardust pretty easily because the Drag Unities, their opening play usually is to play Stardust on the play Dragon Ravine, toss a bunch of monsters, play Stardust on the first turn. So, and then you can just be like, oh, well, I'm going to compulse, and you just wasted your turn. So, yeah, Stardust is not a really big problem for my deck most of the time. Chaos Plants, another big meta deck out there right now. Like I said, with Infernities, Chaos Plants is highly dependent on the graveyard with Debris Drag and Chaos Sorcerer, Dark Armed Spore, Glow Up Bulb, all those cards. So the fact that Necro Valley stops them from removing cards in the graveyard from play or special summoning cards from the graveyard, except actually it doesn't stop Glow Up Bulb, I'm sorry, because Glow Up Bulb technically is its own effect. But yeah, it shuts down a lot of cards in that deck. And yeah, it's very good against Chaos Plants. Monarchs is kind of a questionable matchup because, I mean, the frogs, most Monarch decks use frogs to get tributes out there, especially Ronin Totem. And they can't use Ronin Totem if Necro Valley is on the field because it removes something in the graveyard to special summon itself, and that's a no-no with Necro Valley. So it stops the frogs, but Caius can really, really hurt the Gravekeepers because if they do manage to tribute off for Caius, all your monsters are dark, so they're going to be like, oh, I remove one of your key Gravekeepers, and I'm going to do 1,000 damage to you. You can't get it back if it's removed, then you just took 1,000, and if your field's open, you're going to get 2,400 more, so that is a bad card against you. So the Monarch Monarch lineup is kind of questionable against this deck, but I haven't played that matchup very much, but you could probably win that. Next, like OTK-based decks like Karakuris, Fableds, Fish OTK, it's in those matchups, it's all about the Royal Tribute because those decks aren't as graveyard reliant as the other ones that I've mentioned have been. Royal Tribute against any deck, but especially these decks, can really just cripple a deck if you play it early enough because those decks are not very good at top decking at all. And yeah, the one Royal Tribute can basically that's like game for you. So that's a pretty good weapon against them. Lastly, Samurais and Gladiator Beasts are probably the toughest matchup for this deck because Samurais, their opening play is Shien, which is a lot more formidable against this deck than a Stardust because it can negate any spell and trap effect. So that is, and I'm not sure, monster maybe, yeah, but still and it's 2,500 attack, which is stronger than any of your monsters. So it's a tough thing to get over, tough thing to overcome, especially if they play it on the first turn. And Gladiator Beasts are just all about attacking all the time, and they don't really need the graveyard at all to be successful. So that's a kind of questionable matchup. Royal Tribute helps in both cases, but it may not be enough to cripple their decks entirely. So those are definitely the toughest matchups for Gravekeepers. And lastly, I just wanted to talk about if you're interested in the Gravekeeper deck, where you can find the cards to build it. We were fortunate enough to have Structure Deck Marek released a few months back, and that was pretty much what gave me the inspiration to make this deck in the first place because it pretty much has every Gravekeeper you need for the deck except for Recruiter in common form, Spies, Chiefs, Commandants, all the good stuff in common form. And especially it also has staples like Allure, Necro Valley, Mirror Force. Those cards are definitely needed for the deck, and you can get them fairly easily. Also, Steel is not in the structure deck, but you can get that for like 25 cents, so that's not a big deal either. The only really big money card, so just like I said, just pick up 3 copies of Structure Deck Marek, and you're good to go. So also, like the Recruiters are not a big deal because they're like $3 or $4 online. You can get them pretty cheap or trade for them. A lot of people have them. That's not a big deal to acquire. The money cards in this deck are Royal Tribute and Royal Oppression, the Royals. So Royal Oppression, you only need one of them, and they cost generally around $9 or $10 online. So that's not really a big deal, especially because you only need one of them. However, Royal Tribute is the real problem because, like I said, it's basically the power card of the entire deck. It's the Crush card, and that goes for around $7 or $8 for a common. and that's for a common card. That's like ridiculously expensive. So it's still not a big deal. I mean, you can do it. You need two of them to play the deck, basically. And you're a budget player. I mean, you can probably deal with spending $16 to get a pair of Royal Tributes. So yeah, I mean, that's about it for the Gravekeeper deck. And like I said before, I'm really interested. Like, I have a few more deck profiles of mine lined up, but I really want to get your feedback on this deck, and especially on some creative ideas that you might have to break the meta, as it were. So please comment, subscribe to my channel, shoot me a message or something, shoot me a comment on a deck that you have or that you would like to see that you think is creative and has potential. And if I think the same thing, then I will definitely consider doing a profile on it because I'm going to run out of ideas eventually. So yeah, just if you like this video, like it, subscribe, comment on my channel, blah blah, all that good stuff. Trying to start up a channel here. I really hope people are enjoying this. So yeah, that's my explanation for the Gravekeepers, and until next time, rule the meta, don't let the meta rule you. Peace, YouTube.